Can you tell him to go to the other one?
I just did.
All right, thank you.
Yep. No problem. So yeah, I ordered a ton of those Shedfest memberships for you to go through now.
That's what Jimmy said.
Well, I got the okay from the branch and Mike to supply them to all of our volunteers.
Nice.
We got the
Yeah, I
money in the
appreciate
branch
that.
account. It's given back to the members and more specifically the volunteers.
Yeah.
So.
All right. I think, okay, there's John. Let's all mute for a second and we'll get ourselves.
I'll mute up.
Hey guys.
Come on.
John, we're just getting ourselves situated here. We're going to share to our own personal pages or whatever real quick, and then we'll get her rocking.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben, for helping me here. I feel stupid.
No comment. Okay. I'm good to go if you guys are good to go.
I'm good.
Thank you.
I'm waiting for any more people. I know you said Jimmy's going to be on, but anybody else?
Well, Dallas is not going to join us tonight. He's going to take the night off, sleep before he works the third shift, 11 to 7. So he's probably wanting to get some rest there. And Danny Boy is on COVID protocol right now, so I don't believe he's going to join us. He tested positive. Well, maybe I'm not supposed to say these things. This is HIPAA violation. Danny Boy's sitting in a recliner with a plastic bag over him. So that's where Danny Boy's at.
Gotcha.
So
It's no good.
No, it feels like just yesterday that we were here. So the goal tonight is we got Ben Williams and John Teater back on with us. So if you listened or participated in last week's live event, we had these two guys on. We spent about an hour talking about my personal family property, and then we got into some listener Q&A, but we didn't even get a chance to get to the main questions that we came into the show with. So wanted to just take an hour of time here, and we'll just hammer through these questions and try to address anybody's questions that they had for us leading up to the discussion. So I guess anything before we get rocking from you two?
No, let's just hit them quick, right?
Yeah. Faux show. All right. So let's go with Jimbo's typing them in. So if you want to look, Jimmy is typing the questions into the chat box there, so you guys can look at them. So first question we had was actually from Dan Zaylor, Danny Boy. And I don't think we talked about this on the first podcast. So any tips you guys have for like a small property, like, maybe a 5-acre piece or maybe a little smaller, something that has a house on it, but maybe you have the opportunity to create some habitat or can hunt right in your backyard. You guys got any tips for that? Any experience with things of that nature?
I'd say tip for the small piece would definitely be focus on what the limiting resource is, whatever that is in your neighborhood. If it's the 5-acre cover block in the neighborhood, you got to capitalize on that. Same thing if everybody around you is doing, food plots, kind of get an idea what they're planting, maybe go, with something different, change gears on it. It's tough with a smaller acreage, but as long as it's the right acre, and it's managed right and hunted right, I think you can yield a lot of success off of it. But I would say making it stand out, making it something different than what's in the rest of the neighborhood, I think is a good place to start with that.
Yeah, just to add to it, like example, my own property is 5 acres, that I live on. And, I've got a dense uh, swamp type setup behind me, vernal pools. So I've got dry land. Dry land becomes valuable in those situations. So amplifying usage on dry lands, but also creating some segregation between your house and the deer. I worked on a client's property last year that was 7 acres, and it abutted like a nature preserve, and the quality of hunting on that property was tremendous. And he just differentiated himself from that property with a consistent food source. And really, it could be as simple as that. Planting, food plots is one example. Shrubs, those type of things. But again, to Ben's point, differentiate yourself and focus on what deer want, right? And time of year contingent. And a lot of times in neighborhoods, there's low pressure. I used to hunt suburban areas a good percentage of my teen years, and those are some of the most productive areas because the sources of food are typically the resident neighborhood, and you're just putting yourself, in between, those bedding areas and the neighborhood brush pile. It's pretty simple.
So Danny had another question spinning off of that. Let's say you don't own property, and this is something I'd like to do a whole separate podcast on, because I think it's something that is much needed, especially locally here, to talk about. What if you don't have property? Where do you start if you're looking to purchase property? Obviously, Ben, you sell real estate, so you could very easily probably answer this question, and I'm sure, John, you have some ideas too. But what are the first things you're looking at when you are getting into the position where you want to look to purchase property of your own?
Budget first and foremost is budget. What can you afford? I mean, everybody's probably got a mortgage, everything like that too. So you have to be realistic with what you're looking for. And I would say a lot of people come and or say they're looking for 75, 100, 200 acres, whatever. And then you start giving them the prices for some of these pieces of land, and the cost is there and they can cover the cost, but a lot of people don't think about the tax base they're going to have to escrow into that monthly payment every year. So that's something to definitely consider is budget wise. Most of the clients that I'm seeing now are probably on average, I'd say 30 to 40 acres. Most of the people that are contacting me, I'm not really seeing a lot of bigger acreage clients anymore. It's more of small acreages because that's what people can afford. I'd look at neighborhood. Is it huntable? I mean, if you're buying it for a hunting piece of property, is it going to be huntable? I mean, that should be first and foremost. So can you afford it? Is it huntable? And then, starting to look at what it's got for bare bones. Does it have good topography? Does it have good breakdowns of habitat types? There's lots of pieces, but those are kind of the big three. Budget, you got to be able to buy it and be able to afford to keep it. That's the most important. Secondly, is it huntable? And then third, what kind of bones does it have going forward? Work with an agent if that's something you want to do, but I know plenty of people that have bought land, handshake over the table with neighbors too. So, I mean, agents are a good resource. We can cast a big net out there and find what you're looking for and look at a lot of pieces, help you put you in good touch with good lenders that specialize, especially with Future Forest. We specialize in land and recreational ground specifically. So work with an agent you trust and one that knows land too. Don't call one of the name brand ones or go to Zillow.com and, talk to somebody that's I've been on a showing before with a guy out of a city, we'll say. Not gonna say where it was in the state, but we went out on that property and I told him, I was like, we got to cross a creek to get to the back of this property. And he shows up in dress slacks and probably like $400 Italian leather shoes. So, work with somebody that knows land too. So yeah, there's a lot of good agents out there for a lot of different companies. So I'm not just going to toot my own horn. There's a lot of good options out there for different areas of the state as well.
Yeah, just to add to Ben's point there, for me, I bought my land 3 years ago. I'm a first time, I've had this 5 acres, that we moved in here on, but, several years later, I bought a piece a mile from my house. A lot of it's convenience. I've got 2 kids, right? I can relate to a lot of people in that respect. And my wife doesn't give me a whole lot of time to go enjoy myself because I'm doing this deer thing all the time. So, I would say try to find a parcel that's close. If it's in your backyard, oh, even better, right? The time you can commit to that property to improve it is paramount. The other thing I would say is pick a diverse property. I go to a lot of these properties. I was just on one 2 days ago that's completely woodlot, and it takes a lot of work and effort when it's a mature forest land, conifer, hardwood, what have you. It takes a lot of work to transfer that property to something more usable. We didn't get into this last time, but there's ideal percentages of breakup of vegetation types that I like to promote. And a woodland setting is, when I send my graphs out to everybody, that's red. And that typically means bad. And it's not always bad, but generally speaking, it's not what you're looking for. So, because it's a big woodlot setting, doesn't make it more valuable or better for hunting than a field setting. So just think about that. So that's another important consideration. And think about the work and time and effort that's going to go into that property at some point. That could become overly consuming. So you could buy a better property, maybe smaller, that has more diversity, again in the right neighborhood, that's closer, that could be way more productive than a property that's maybe 1,000 or 50, down in Allegheny County or some of those Western New York areas. Land's cheap. Land's relatively cheap. Land up by me is 3,000-4,000 an acre in some areas, 5 or 6 in a couple areas just east of me. So, it makes it, that affordability aspect, like Ben says, important. So
yeah,
think about that and think about convenience.
And financing wise, you can't just go take a mortgage out on property, right? Don't you have to pay cash, or you have to work something out with somebody, or what?
It depends on the lender. There's some lenders that are better and more apt to land sales. There's a couple kind of in our local area that I've worked with specifically trying to, set people up with the financing. You are going to need a little bit more down in a lot of cases. But there are options out there. So, and like I said, it's tough to say, but those agents can put you in contact with them. I mean, if you go to maybe your local bank or whoever you do business with, they're like, well, I don't want to write a land loan because there's no equity there for a bank. They can't sell that piece on auction like they could a house or whatever to recoup their investment on it. So that's why the bank doesn't like to stick their neck out on land as much as they do. But the land values alone should be telling the bank that, there's value there. And I have seen in the last, 2-3 years, they've definitely, started to work with people a lot better too on it.
Yeah.
And Ben, are interest rates typically higher on land than the raw land than it is, something with a house on it?
It depends on the lender and it depends on what it's doing on the day, but it can be, just because that risk is there for the bank as loaning the money. But I wouldn't say that it'd be much more than another % or 2 higher at most. And you're also putting more down too. And if you have good finances and stuff like that, I mean, all that's going to help along with the process and make it better. But there's a lot of variables in it, but that's a good point too. There is a little bit of difference in interest rates, I'd probably say. But and usually they're shorter term loans, so they're a little bit bigger than, let's say a mortgage payment might be. Depends on how big a property you're going with and stuff like that. But usually they're shorter notes. They're not like 30-year loans. They might be like a 15 or 20 or something like that. But yeah, that's a good point too.
Yeah. And one thing that you guys didn't mention that I'll point out, and I want to do a separate podcast with my dad on this. I talked to him about it recently. Is how they swung it. My dad and my uncle purchase the 80 something acres we have with the cabin when they didn't have the money to do it. And they purchased it with the intentions of paying for it with logging cuts and with firewood. So that's something to keep in mind too, that if you have a way to make money off of the property, you can try to pay it off. So it took many, many years and a lot of hard work to get it paid for, but they did it by just the hard work, simply, selling the wood and the resources that were on the property, and programs that we got into for a few years there to help with taxes and things like that. So there's different ways around it, but it's definitely a challenge.
Assess that when you buy a piece of property. I worked with a client 2 years ago when I first started doing this, and he had black walnut all through his property. Each tree was anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000, maybe if it was $3,000. One particular tree, one section, we caught, there were 30 trees. I mean, that easily paid for the property. I paid for most of my property by logging it as well. I had, in fact, a lot of these properties, mine's 100% woodlot. I knew when I was going into it, I was going to log, a huge percentage of it. We're doing a logging, they're going to log next week. I marked timber last 2 weeks ago. They're going out and logging my property. So I do it in phases, and there's a rationale behind that, but you can really, not be overextended because as a result of that, and that could be super helpful. So
yeah,
that great option.
Yeah. In a hurry. And you got to look at that too, because, you can look at a piece of property. If you're somebody like me, who I'm not a good judge of those things, you can go through and, look there's a lot of mature trees in here, but those trees might not be worth a damn. So, have somebody that knows what they're talking about and can speak to that to jump in there. So,
yeah. And I know, John, I think you've done pre-visit or pre-purchase evals or whatever too.
Yeah. I do a couple of those a year. I don't do a ton of them. I like them because I get to travel and critique things, and usually they haven't bought any, but it's nice because you get down to maybe 2 properties, and that's one of the huge considerations is, long-term sustainability. And the way I look at it is it pays for the taxes. My property, let's say it's $3,000-$4,000 a year in taxes. I mean, that starts to really add up. I mean, you're basically paying to hunt every single year.
Right.
And the price of owning land is tough. It is tough.
Yep. All right, moving on. So J2 Bouchard, he's one of the Redneck Rising guys. Shout out to JT. Thanks for the questions. He's got a few for you. So he's working on creating some new food plots in a timber stand. First question is stumps. Any experience with leaving all the stumps is his question. What's your guys' thoughts on that? If you're clearing an area, leaving stumps, digging them out, a little bit of both. What do you think?
I mean, a lot of times it depends on the density of trees, and are you doing it? Somebody else is doing it, right? The expense of that. I've done both ways with an excavator. I've done it with a dozer. We've used a forestry mulcher in some areas where the trees are a lot smaller, but then you've got that wood duff layer. You have to remove that. So there's a raking aspect to it. So my personal preference, and it depends on the quality and type of soil that you're dealing with. So it's site specific. I like using an excavator to move it around. You can dig it out, especially one with a thumb. You can move it. You can move stuff. My own personal property, we use a dozer. A project I was just on, another project I was just on, we use an excavator. So, I like getting the stumps out personally. You do not have to get the stumps out. You can burn them out. There's other options. It takes time. You can work around them. If you're doing a poor man's thing, cut them as low as you can to the ground and work around them. Nothing says, and they'll eventually, it takes a while to rot, but you can drill holes in them. I've seen guys burn them. I like to cut the trees, put them in the center, depending on the quality of soil, and burn it all. That's a good way to do it. I like to, my own personal property, I didn't want to put that volume of ash in the ground. I have a ton of nutrients. I don't need condensed nutrients in that area. I put it to the side, created these buffer zones, actually up to a creek some distance away. And that's kind of, that was a strategy, but I like removing stumps personally, but it depends on the location.
Yeah, real good points with that. The first thing I would do before even cutting trees, like we talked about before, identify it and make sure that plot is going to work and going to do what you want to do. Just because you think that you're up there on top of that ridge or whatever it might be and say, man, I got to clear that plot here. If you can't hunt it, or if it doesn't work to the overall flow of your property, it might not be the place to even be cutting. So take that step back, because once, like we talked about before, you made the joke of it, Bill, in the beginning of the last one. Can we like glue the trees back together that we cut down?
Yeah.
So, so that's something to consider. And, to John's point, it is handy if you have, the good soil there where you can remove the stumps, and it's effective in doing that. Dozers with root rakes. If you are getting somebody with a dozer, try to get one that's got a root rake on it. Makes cleanup a lot smoother, a lot easier. Gets rid of a lot of that riprap with it as you go. Also, you could do it where you do more of a linear plot. It doesn't have to be maybe a big square or a turkey foot or a donger or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have to be, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'll have to write that in my plans coming up.
You should throw that in there and see if anybody recognizes it.
If it fits the way the property lays, I mean, you never know. Yeah, but anyway, so there's lots of options, with it. It doesn't have to be a big square, hourglass, turkey foot, whatever, for a plot. It could really be a linear plot and help flow, movement, rather than just be a food source that, might be later on in the evening time. It could just be one that's kind of, as they go to a bigger plot, that you might have at a different piece of the property, or even on to the neighbors at that point. You've had your opportunity at those animals. So, just something to consider with the stumps too.
Ben, the one good point you're getting at there is the height of trees, right? The height of trees and that slope, that's going to dictate how much available sun. And those food plots, depending on what you're planning, you want at least 6 hours of sun if you can get it. And a lot of these guys, I see they go home and they create these micro food plots with canopy in them. There's no purpose to that. The same thing applies if you're in our area, we can't burn, but if you're burning or hinge cutting, or the objective is to get sun to the forest floor, and you need a significant amount of sun. You have to think of the slope and the orientation of the sun, and that is a huge factor in all that stuff. I like to create S's. I'm always on this forum that I'm on, and guys are asking all these questions. I'm always piping back. I feel like, I'm the asshole in the forum room, but I'm always coming up with designs and posting stuff. And one of the things is, if you have lower vegetation adjacent or next to those food plots, that could be a source of food, a source of cover, but it gives more available sun. So sometimes felling trees, they talk about edge feathering. The edge feathering, the focus of that is shrubby material adjacent, and it could be a source of food, it could be a source of cover, it could be a barrier, visual barrier, but those a lot of times create more available sun to the center of the food plot. I do not like trees in the center of food plots. I do not like them. Low understory trees maybe are bushes, so you'll see in some of my designs I'll have bushes. Usually they're edible bushes, but I don't have trees in the center of food plots. You see those on a lot of designs that detracts from, the overall sun. It's usually not a good idea. And then there's a maintenance thing, and you usually get wind throw depending on the volume of water or what the water basin is that sustains that tree. So there's, not to add to that more so, but there's a lot to consider when you're creating food plots. I don't think I'm going to do the dong design, but I might think about it.
No judgment zone here. The we up at our camp, we're a perfect example of the food plots in a wood lot that on a side hill. It's an east facing slope, and it's funny. Yeah, there's spots in each one of the 3 food plots that grow well, but now as the more you talk about and you think about the sun, and it came to me, Ben, when you were talking about pruning apple trees and releasing them, you want open from the west, south, or the east, south, and west. And our food plots only get 4 or 5 hours of sun max a day, and then the sun's over the hill and you're not getting anything. So, that's definitely a good point there. I think that's something probably at the top of my list that rings to me, is you got to make sure you got good sunlight.
I mean, the nice part of east, I don't want to make fun of you, but the nice part about like those east slopes is they do burn off well in the morning. So like to Ben's point, apple trees in those regions, you reduce the fungal matter or disease that potentially results as the amount of moisture that sits around those trees. Keep them higher, keep them with that east available sun. If you get a little southern exposure, like he suggested, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
And when you say burn off, you're talking that morning dew, that moisture's coming off because you have the sun rising and you've got thermals going up and it's pulling air away from the trees, right? Is that what you're
Yeah, and
Didn't have
and
that.
height is critical to that, right? Its elevation is critical. You don't want any low spot trees. I mean, I won't do a pruning thing, but the airflow is number one aspect of maintaining or reducing fungal matter on a tree. That lichen content, deer eat it, but we're not trying to get them to eat apple trees. I mean, not the tree itself, obviously.
Right.
Maybe that's what you're trying to do. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. What's a good thing to do / plant in a timber area to improve bedding on a 10-acre piece? So if you've got some timber, you don't have a ton of bedding, is there any ideas of what you can plant that will help plant, or maybe even cut, that might help you create bedding?
I prefer non-edible shrubs. I don't want to give recommendations species because I don't know exactly what your soil type is, the available sun, those all come into play. I prefer non-edible species, at least in bedding areas. Like if I'm just going to try to get something established, then once those are established, I add edible things. And when I do my cuts, I'm trying to create, and this is really simple-minded, field settings which take pressure off. So if I'm going to plant edible shrubs, you better fence them. And then adjacent to that, I'm going to have another food source that's going to take the pressure off those. So I would consider shrubs. Shrubs is like I said before, the vegetation types that deer prefer are shrubs, especially in woodland settings. So if you have a big woodland spaced out and you have an opening and you have some structure in there, that shrubby structure, again, more available site like we just talked about on that site location. And then you have structure for loafing. There's going to be a lot of interest from animals in those areas. It's a cooling effect. Plus, you'll find a lot of breeding in those areas later in the season. So it provides a lot of benefit. Just the structure itself can dictate the interest. It doesn't have to be a food-based structure. So a lot of people need to get that out of their minds because most people don't want to maintain that and fence it. So I tend to stay away from edible, but it just depends on the situation.
Give an example of a shrub, like just something you've used. And
Nine bark. I've used nine bark a lot.
Okay.
On edge areas, one of my favorite is plums. I love plum thickets, but you got to fence them. So there's two examples of two variants. A client's property right now, we're doing beach plum, sandy soil. Scrub oaks or bare oaks, those are food producers. Dwarf chickapin oaks, those aren't necessarily local, but they do well in sandy soil. So again, match the shrub to the soil and the sun requirement, and that will give you an answer. Red Rose Dog was a good example. I mean, we could go. There's tons of them. I use blueberry bush as an example for cover in a lot of these areas because a lot of acidic soil. Viburnums. I mean, I can go down the list. I mean, there's tons, but not edible and not edible. They eat viburnums. So you got to start to pick species that they want to eat or not eat, and use that as your selection choice. And if you don't know, that's why you call a consultant like us. Ben and I know this stuff. This is what we do. We provide recommendations.
Yeah. So, I mean, good thing to do for plant and timber areas to improve bedding on a 10-acre piece. I wouldn't necessarily look at it as a whole 10-acre block of cover. I would definitely break it up too. I wouldn't just cut a whole 10 acres necessarily, especially if that's your only 10-acre block of cover. I would, do something to diversify across that piece rather than just do a paintbrush prescription on it. And John's not doing that. And I'm not trying to say that, JT's doing that either, but that's something to really think about is, working on that piece and making several stand locations that fit with the way that that's being timbered. Pick out your stand locations ahead of time, and your access and all that stuff before you even start to dive into, cutting or planting or doing. I kind of guess I sound like a broken record with the access thing, but if your access isn't there, your improvements are, for naught. So I would say if you're trying to encourage, bedding in that timber, and it is like wide open timber, let's just say that, because I see that in a lot of pieces. Just providing structure, leaving the tops in the woods. You might take the logs out for a timber harvest, like John was saying on his property, but just putting that structure in there, working with some of the topography that might be there in that timbered area too, just making that more attractive, make it different, make it something, that deer want to be around. When you open up the canopy, food's going to come in,
Yeah.
growth's going to come in. It might be non-native in some areas, but the food component of some sort is going to come in, whether that's great or not. A lot of that's going to come naturally from the sunlight, and then leaving the structure of the tops. Don't do what a lot of timber companies do, or loggers do in a lot of cases, and chop down the tops. They'll cut them every 4-foot sections in the top, so they lay low, so they look better from a human perspective, but you just killed any cover in there, any escape cover for predators, anything like that, any of that structure that was there, that good structure that would be there for, I'd say, about a decade. Usually, if you leave a treetop in the woods, about a decade you get out of it in some structure aspect.
Yeah.
As well as you'll start to get growth inside that the deer can't reach to browse. So that'd be a good way to start with it, is figure out where your stands are and locations to that area. Might be an area that you can't hunt too, that you want deer to funnel out of coming into an area, and you can get on the end of a funnel, bottleneck, pinching a ridge. I mean, it's tough to say without looking at the topo map and the map about a unique prescription, but those are some good kind of bullet point ideas for, a 10-acre, timber area for management.
And I'll just add one more point to finish off this is I worked with a client that was dealing with a lot of swampy areas, and you may have willow species, all different type of species in those areas, and the regen factor in those areas is so low that it's really difficult to make decisions to cut in those areas without trying to replant something. So a lot of times, if you're dealing with wet areas or poor fertility areas, you are not going to get the regen response that you typically want. So Ben's recommendation of leaving the treetops as structure, and a lot of times, like we talked last go around, we're talking about back cover being a big component of the way I'm designing these bedding areas, is stack trees on top of trees. A lot of times where I want areas where the deer can't access, I'm just laying trees all flat, using that as a kind of a fencing mechanism. Whereas the back cover area where you have, again, poor structure because you cut everything down, you need structure to sit on the structure. So, you have to have the ability to do that as well. So after a project, there's other work that comes into play. By the way, it's hard to get tractors back in those areas and mess around and elevate things. So, hinge cutting actually becomes a pretty good tool in some of those areas where you're dealing with kind of that smaller, smaller size timber that you're working with. So, don't weigh that out and introduce the right species in those areas. And willows, again, I love those willows. They work for everything. So
yeah. Let me throw this at you related to that. So that piece that we're working on right now, I posted the videos from over the weekend, and I was working on those apple trees, and we're cutting a bunch of that buckbrush down, and I kind of created a little bit of a wall there on it's the west side. So that would be the back cover I'm trying to create. I kind of created that wall because I have all that buckbrush I cut down. So I dragged it down, got it up out of everything that it was hung up in, and created a little bit of a barrier there. I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on that? I mean, is that productive? Is it not productive? Does it not really matter? What are your thoughts to that?
When I'm creating are you talking back cover bedding or back area for segregation and buffering?
For bedding and cover, really, because this area is just it's open. I mean, there's no understory. So
all right,
me cutting that down now, automatically that area it's got cover now, and there's beds in there since I did the cutting a weekend ago. I come back in the following weekend, and there's beds all around those apple trees where I've got that wall built of buckbrush.
And I'm not sure exactly what brush, but one of the recommendations I typically have, and this is a good rule of thumb for everybody, is you have at least 3 entry and exit points to any bedding area. 3, minimally 3, not 2, 3. And even to small little segmented bedding areas, you have minimally 3, forward, side. I mean, a lot of people don't recognize that. If you're going to create back cover shouldn't be in a long linear path. It should be short segmented areas. I'm not going to give you specific descriptions because those are specific to my clients. Height of back cover is significant for the type of deer, male, female, that frequent an area. So that's even more interesting. There's been studies on the height of the back cover that relate to the deer interest. And then we talked last time about predation aspects of it, is the visual aspect in relationship to that back cover. So you can look at it in a bunch of different functions, but back cover is critical. So I wouldn't have a long linear line, shorten it up a little bit, Make sure that there's ins and outs, right? And enough accessibility in those areas, and segment them in different angles and shapes and forms. So you've got one at one angle, one at a different angle, one at a different angle. So it just gives different orientations so they can put their body in different positions and incorporate, some overhead aspect of it. So you don't have to go back in there and work that underlying brush. That's the only reason why we're doing that. So I think that'll help. Even if you cut trees, over time you can add species of poplar, aspen, integrating aspen into open areas, high moisture areas though. Those are north and east slopes, not south and west slopes. My property is a perfect example. I cut aspen. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to regenerate. It's going to work. It's got a southern exposure, and I knew that. I've done this and I know that stuff. And I'm like, nope, it's going to work. Right. So
it's real dry. So it's real dry there is what you're saying. With the southern exposure, it's getting a lot of sun, so it's dry.
Yeah. So you're going to pick species. And actually what I like to do in those areas is I like to integrate oaks. Drier oak species do really well in there, not for food. If you're planting any oaks and you think you're going to get a source of food in the next 15 or 20 years, you're fooling yourself. There are some hybrid species that produce. Sawtooths are one of those examples. Yes, they say they're not native to this area, but they work. And I'm not suggesting planting sawtooths. I'm just saying that's one example. But some of these hybrids, planting them within those structure that I love. You got to love how the leaves hang onto the branches. A great source of cover. There's a scientific reason behind that, but basically what I look at is it provides a nice visual aspect of it, and it actually knocks down the wind a little bit. And deer tend to utilize those pretty good, and maybe eventually they become a food source. So.
Okay, let's keep rolling. Next one, JT had a question in regards to putting water in. No water at the top of a ridge. How big of water hole should I put in? Any experience with these? Have you guys ever done anything putting water in places where there isn't normally water?
So
I failed a lot at this. So
water is like John said, water is tricky, and it's tricky to get right. In a lot of cases, I've found with water, it can be a focal point along movement to put it by a stand potentially location. Like if you have a ridge running, that's a place to set up for a shot, similar to like a mock scrape, even like on a rub line, something like that, something that's going to hold deer up in that area, or even like a small mini kill plot. It's kind of the same thing. You're trying to really attract just a fine area of attention to that spot to slow the deer up as they're transitioning through, when in their daily routine or whatever it might be. Is it critical to have water? No, deer get most of their water from the vegetation that they eat. It's not as big a deal. Deer aren't, dying of thirst here in New York on the regular. It's not like Oklahoma or some states like that down south where they have very, very low rainfalls, Texas, stuff like that. But it can have a place. I would say more along the lines of a good solid movement by a stand location to maybe sweeten it up in some aspect. But I don't think water's a cure all. I see some people push a little bit too much on water. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to do a water, it's got to be, you got to get like a stock tank from like, Tractor Supply or something. Kiddie pools are not going to work. They're not going to last. Especially like, John was saying too, taking the aspect of the situation. If you're looking at south, east, where that water's getting baked off every single day, and it doesn't have any kind of shade to it, you're going to evaporate more than the deer are going to drink out of it.
Yeah. So just to add to that is I used to do these little small 10, 15 gallon rubber, you get them from Tractor Supply, they're troughs for horses. I did those 10 years ago because I saw one time a deer 5 years before that go into a trough. I was down in Allegheny County watching the field and I said, oh my gosh, you just drank out of a trough. Holy cow, I got to get, so I had $8, $10, $15. I bought one, put it in the ground, just those are little things. But what I learned over time is simply their interest point changes, right? When the water, water content in forbs is pretty high. As those start to senesce, this is actually really important during the rut time. The deer start to put more focus and interest obviously in breeding. If they can take a quick drink on a way to, the next bedding area, like Ben said, in a line of movement, it makes a lot of sense. You see interest levels increase. So what I've done over time is I've been paying attention to that, because there's a couple people that I know that are consultants that I just think I thought it was the dumbest idea. For years, I thought it was the dumbest idea. I changed the size of them and I got more interest. The last thing I'll say is, I would say anywhere between 100 to 300 gallons. You got to fill those up. You got to maintain and clean those annually. Now there's new chemicals are coming out with that you can put in that can alleviate. And obviously Ben talked about southern exposure. You don't want a huge amount of sun exposed to them. So if you could have some overhead cover to kind of minimize that and kind of maintain that water source, but you might have to clean them. So a drainage point on them is nice. Otherwise, you got to scoop them out with a bucket and refill them. And it's a lot of work for not a lot of return. So I don't typically recommend them very often, but if you want to put in the work, I don't think it'll hurt you. I mean, it's not certainly going to hurt you. But I would say 100 to 300 gallon. And then, how are you going to maintain it? How are you going to fill it up? And is it in the right location? Flat location, minimal slope. Don't have any slope to those whatsoever. I've tried different sloping features, and what I'm doing now is I'll have a little bit of slope to it, and I'll edge it out so I can get to that a drainage system, because I don't want to bucket out 300 gallons. I don't have the time to do that. So there's some recommendations, but they're not my first choice of a special feature aspect of the design. It's like a last, if you got nothing to do a water hole.
And I know JT's got plenty to do. So
yeah, and I know that they, like John was saying, they're coming out with chemicals. You can run like algicides and stuff like that in them. For maintenance on them, like he said, annual cleanouts. Definitely, I'd say springtime is a good time. I don't really have issues with them freezing and cracking too much. Especially if you get like a decent quality one. Don't go buy like the $20 100-gallon one or something necessarily, because cheaper material is going to probably be prone to breaking more. And then just a good hard rake is usually what I would clean mine out with. Getting a majority of the leaves out. And if you haven't watched any of the water hole kind of videos and stuff like that, make sure you got a stick or something for small mammals and critters to climb out of if they fall into it. That's just, something that'll sour that water right out. And then, like John said, you will be bucketing out every last drop of that water, otherwise nothing will touch it.
And scrubbing and cleaning,
Yeah.
Get your Dawn dish detergent out, boys. There we go. That doesn't sound fun.
No, that doesn't sound fun. Don't do it, JT. You heard it here. Apple trees. He also planted a bunch of apple trees last year. Any tips for keeping them healthy? So obviously we don't know at what stage the apple trees were at, but let's say they were not seedlings, but they were already up whips. I think Mike Edwards calls them. Let's say they were already whips. What are you guys doing?
The whips is the first stage of that. So that'd be basically look like a stick you're planting in the ground. And some of the first whips I planted with my dad, on our piece would have been 2007. We planted some of the first apple trees on the farm that we put in, and they were sticks. And my dad was like, yeah, that's how apple trees come, because he grew up working on an orchard for a local fruit grower. And big thing if you are planting whips is training them right. If you are going to tube them short and fence them. Make sure you're protecting them against rodents. You can use, like Mike, I heard him in your podcast, Bill, he suggested the window screening. I've never used that personally. I've always used the spiral white bark guards. Those have kind of been a go-to because they grow with the tree a lot better. And there's not as much friction and stuff like that you might get with like a metal, kind of a mesh material. You could see some potential injury to the bark, opening up for disease and stuff. So I would definitely say short tubes if you are going to tube them, no bigger than I would say 4 max on a tube, because after the first year they'll be out the top of it. Fence them. Definitely don't let the deer browse them, because they'll ruin your trees, and once they're top, you're screwed. So they can really screw it up, set the trees back, kill them. There's a lot of things with apple trees. They're a fair amount of work. Like, you talked about it with Mike in his podcast. He went through the whole shebang. He fenced it all off, had a push mower in there, the whole nine. And Mike's trees are phenomenal. Don't get me wrong. I'm really hard pressed to find better, trees in that length of time. But a lot of work. we talked about that too. So, and I've seen whips outgrow like 3 or 5 gallon potted trees in size too. So just because it's a potted one for fruit tree production might not be, the fit. So make sure you got cross pollinators, and I'll turn it over to John because I know I'm just kind of bullet pointing, stuff with apple trees. So I'm sure John's got something to add on it.
I've planted and lost a lot of apple trees. I've lost them to borers. And, you'll get a 7-8-year-old tree, and next thing you know, you got a borer that drilled a hole. It looks like a drill bit. Somebody took a drill bit and they're eating the interior tree. So I'm a big fan of aluminum screening. Staple them up, and you can go 3-4 foot high. I actually like low branches. Some people don't like that. I like low branches, and the strategy is the branch structure needs to be down, not up. There's an optimal based on the size of the tree and the size of the stem. There's an optimal setup that you want for the number of branches. Training period for those branches. We want branches that are, I don't want to say a 45 degree, but they have to be positioned somewhat in that angle so you can train them. Usually use year 2, 3, and 4. I train trees. This year I'm on year 5. I'm going to train my trees this year. I waited. I tried a different rootstock. I tried Geneva rootstocks for my own personal orchard. And I typically wouldn't do that in my other orchard. I never did that. I would never mess with those, but I was interested in production for the house. So I wanted apples faster. And, it's not good to have those apples produce too quick. You want to establish root growth. But that's definitely an example. I'm trying to think what else that I've done in trees. Try to keep, I typically don't use rock. I typically use a fabric material, road fabric that they use. Lumite is what they call it. I typically use that around the base of the tree. Definitely cage and fence them. And I'm not doing huge fences around them. I just don't want to spend a lot of money on fencing. The deer get them, they get them. But I'm saving that central leader. But I am a lot of times trying to have branches lower, so my aluminum screening is lower. And actually, I'm using it to protect so the deer don't come in and rub them. They're less amped to rub the tree with a lot of lower branches. So that's one option. And I don't mind if the mice eat the branches in the wintertime rather than the stem. So to the mice wrap, like Ben was talking about, I think you got to have some type of wrap around the stem. And you take that off around year 10. Year 10, usually you can get away with taking it off. So, that's just an example. But prune your trees, create a lot of vigor. Trees that are in I think the year 5 trees here, I'm looking at 6 to 8 branches per tree, and I'm trying to get alternate trees. I'll notch so I get another branch off the side of the stem. So I will create branches myself by notching. There's a lot of things you can do to apple trees. I'm not an expert apple tree guy, but I've done enough and I've lost enough trees. So
quick here. Resources for there's a ton of stuff with apple trees, and when you start going into it, so who or what resources would you guys point people to? Because apple trees is a whole another monster in itself. Like, who are you guys getting your info from? Do you have any books to recommend or videos, anything like that?
Well, I just did an apple tree video, but I'm not saying
Williams. Yep.
I'm not saying
the whole process. I feel like, you guys get talking about apple trees and it's like Judas Priest. Geneva stock, freaking whips. So there's a lot going on. It's not just as simple as how you prune them, and there's a lot going on there. So, where are you guys? What's a source, or is there a source that you guys trust for kind of start to finish apple tree life?
So majority of the trees, unless you're planting them, a majority of the trees that a lot of landowners are going to deal with is something that's on a piece of, property there, whether it was planted by a bird, planted by a farmer, whatever it might have been way back in the day. And the big thing is just releasing that tree and getting that tree, back to where it might even be able to produce. If it gets stressed and stuff like that and, just out competed with, it's not going to produce for you. So, the pruning and the training, there's basic bullet points. Mike's podcast with you, that I was probably 10, 15 minutes of your conversation. Like,
Yeah.
It'd be worth wholeheartedly listening to that, going back, and anybody listening to this that wants more on apple trees, I would definitely go try to find that thumbnail for that part. But yeah, it's a lot of mine I kind of take for granted because I learned it from my dad, the pruning and all that stuff. Um, timing of your pruning is right now, winter time for your pruning. You don't want branches growing, John says, out, but not down. You don't want you want good forming branches like you talked about, 45-degree angles, something around that shape that will handle that load bearing weight. You don't want straight off because there's no structural support there. You want good growth so that branch can hold and support tons of apples, literally, in cases. So Cornell's got a lot of good examples, but like I wouldn't go, wicked hard on, trees you find in a hedgerow or something like that. Cause, a lot of times I've knocked I'll be straight honest with you. I've cut them too hard and I've killed them. Or they didn't respond, after I released the grapevines and the poison ivy and the 2 ash trees that were growing up through it. There wasn't really much left of that apple tree that was still alive and good. So, you can save yourself a lot of work by just trimming out competition and trees that you find on a piece of property.
I get my apple trees a lot of times from Waffler Nursery. That's up in Wolcott. I've used them for, I don't know, 15, 18 years now. There's a lot of coming. I mean, there's a ton of sources. Get northern varieties, northern hardy varieties, basically figure out your zone, your temperate zone and how that works. But, YouTube, there's a crazy guy, I think he's a Czech, that I pay attention to. He's just permaculture guy. And those guys really plant a lot of complementary plantings. And I'm trying to figure out who he is. I pay attention to him every now and again, but there's a lot of stuff on YouTube. I mean, in my client packages, I'm putting together, some recommendations, not varieties to plant, but how to maintain them. There's tons of stuff out there. I would generally YouTube it, and the steps are pretty simple and they're unique to everyone's goals. Some people want a pretty looking tree, and there's nothing wrong with a pretty looking apple tree. And it doesn't have to be as functional as we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Next question. Well, I'm going to tie a question from, it's JT's last question. I'm going to tie that to a question that Nick Scott had. It's about food plots, small food plots, kind of kill plots. How close, part one is how close is too close to a house for, for a kill plot. And John, I feel like you'd be somebody that could speak to this, knowing your situation. So that's part one of the question. Any experience with backyard kill plots? How close is too close?
Well, hunting out a playground and, yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, if you're in an area where you can shoot them off the deck, I don't see anything wrong with that. Obviously, legal distances are critical, but with that aside, approach and access is everything. Ben said this is, that's his mantra, and I agree with him 100%. Creating buffer zones and being able to access those areas, there's no reason you can't have a food plot 75 yards off the back of your deck. And probably that would be a reasonable threshold. Create some separation. You could plant some hybrid sorghum in those areas to separate and isolate and compartmentalize that food source. And it's a draw. I'm working on a property coming up. It's 100% field. So, and the neighbors, the landowner's house is, he's basically, you drive along driveway and there's giant fields and there's a little strip of woods and a drop off. So we're converting that. And he's going to essentially be walking on his front door, overlooking into his redneck blind into this field setting. I mean, he's hunting literally feet from his doorstep. So I don't see anything wrong with it if you can make it happen. And my deer aren't using them at night. Most of my deer are here during the daylight. So they're used to my presence and pressure. But just have variety, a variety source in those food plots. I'm a big multi-species guy, and there's a reason why. We talk about diversity in habitat for deer specifically, and then diverse food sources for deer. So I'm a huge advocate of that. And I do understand beans are killer and corn is killer. But though, you can incorporate a lot of diversity into your food plots for deer, and that becomes, a huge attraction source.
Yeah, good, real good points. I mean, we keep saying that about everybody. I mean, everybody's got good points with this because everybody's got different perspectives. And that's what I like about, especially these kind of Q&A sessions like this. But with that too close to the house thing, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but like I said, you got to really think critical of it. If that's your only way, let's say out the back door to hunt your piece of property next to a house, let's say, I might not be planting that food plot there because if that's my main access out, it won't work. So you have to think about that too, as how any improvement you make on a piece of property is going to relate to the overall effectiveness of that property. So I've seen places like John said, you shoot them out the back deck, you shoot them, whatever. I mean, my parents' house is a great example of that, where it's a very small plot and it's that kind of size for a reason. There's a small little apple orchard down there and a small, I think it's less than a tenth of an acre, if that. And it was cereal grains this year, but it's a place where if dad really wanted to step out on the back deck when the does are coming through there at night to go to the bigger food plot because they bed kind of adjacent to that, he could do that if he wanted to. John said legal distance to houses. I mean, if you're getting into residential areas where you might be small acreage and trying to pack it on there, make sure your stand location is legal distance. You don't want to, may making bad neighbors or getting in trouble with the law for sure. So, yeah, I mean, I'm all for it if it works 100%. It can be, like John said, 50, 75 yards, shoot them off the back deck. I mean, whatever you want to call it. As long as it works, it works.
And then, just another thing to think about is if we talked about the segregation buffering, there's no reason you can't put berms in your backyard. Building berms, that's a good option to create segregation. It's almost like belly crawling and sneaking over the top and kind of shooting them in their breadbasket. So, that's another good option for people, because I like the idea of coming out of your house, sneaking up the hill, and down below there's that luscious food plot that they, and that's kind of that example you can recreate even on flat ground. So, don't think that you're, just because you can see everything. There wasn't a deer in my backyard when I moved here, not a deer, zero. We never saw tracks for 2 years. And my wife's like, what do you want to do? And I said, want to watch deer every night? All right, we're going to do it. And in 5 acres, we transformed it. We got bees, right? She's crazy about bluebirds. You can transform these small acreages to be these biodiverse meccas. And I think I might have talked about the ornithologists that have come here and they trap for the Lyme disease. They were checking birds for Lyme disease. I got a couple of buddies from Cornell, and they said this was the most diverse habitat they've ever been on. Vegetation type diversity was unique. And it's not, I didn't do anything special. I just diversified it. I mean, it was real simple. I let the yard grow up, I mean, it's not, again, it's not rocket
science.
Yeah,
there's old cars parked out in the front yard, grass all grown up around them. Yeah, that's John's house, if anybody's wondering.
Junkyard hunting, man. They love that structure. They bed right up against it. It's great bed cover.
Yeah, that's not a half bad idea. You just go to a junkyard and get a whole bunch of shitty cars and just pile them up, make yourself a little barrier there. Anywho, let's move on.
I got some stories about junkyard hunting, and let me tell you something. They deer use it for bedding.
You got a story for everything, freaking piece of work.
Yeah.
Kill plots. How close is too close to bedding for a kill plot? Another question from Nick.
I don't even know what a kill plot is. I don't even know what that means.
I mean, it's
deer
kind
can
of
die in any. So a kill plot to me is a very small plot that you're just trying to lure that deer out and get a kill.
Yeah, I think they're more of a transitional plot. I mean, like, you can kill a deer on kind of any food plot in some way, shape, or form, but it's kind of a, the buzzword, but that kill plot, it's usually just like a transitional plot, usually pretty tight up to bedding. But something you can get in and on, off of, that you don't have to worry about filling up at the end of the night. I know there's some consultants and stuff that talk out there, drive to your stand, drive out of your stand, put as much pressure as you can, non-human, but pressure to get on and off. I think that's counterproductive. That would work if you have thousands of acres, but if we're hunting small properties, that's not going to work. To get on and off big food sources at night, you're gonna ruin it, and ruin it very quickly. And I do that on a couple plots on my specific property, and for clients too, is I'll stage, and it might only be a 50-yard distance between that small little teardrop of a small plot to a big plot coming out of that bedding area. that place where the deer have already moved off. They're out on the main food. You can still maybe see them, maybe even not see them. Only see them if there's snow on the ground, and you can get off and get out at night.
Yeah.
And you're not sitting on top of a food plot for, believe me, I've done it, sat there for 2-3 hours, after dark, literally just waiting for, I think it's about 2 hours after dark. I'll climb down now.
Yeah.
Literally, if there's deer on the field, and sometimes I'll climb down before the end of legal shooting, just because I don't want deer on a food source and I can get out quick. So I'd say those kill plots or transitional plots, whatever you want to call them, I'd put them pretty close to the bedding, because that's where you want to get them during daylight before they go out to any of the big food plots. Especially if you've been pressuring your big food plots, you're going to be pushing that movement further back, on the clock. So
yeah, and I'll just hit this and then we'll go to the next question. Nick is our neighbor. I know the property that he hunts and the way it all lays out, and so I kind of know where he's talking, where he's thinking. I think sunlight's a huge piece of it. I know the areas that he has. It's very dark timber right now. There's a lot of good bedding. Probably some of the best bedding in the block is on his property. So you got kind of that challenge there, like putting a kill plot in. How much are you going to have to cut down and change the habitat in order to get that food to grow there? He does have some good overgrown pastures that he might be able to put some stuff into, but I will dub it back into our property in Naples. We're doing the same thing here at the farm. We're going backwards on food plots, where we were just food plot crazed, and you can tell by all the questions that we're getting here. My idea for these live podcasts was to talk about stuff you could be doing right now in the winter to improve your habitat for your hunting in the fall. And everybody wants to talk about food plots and chemicals and seed and mix. It's interesting, right? Because we're going the other way, and we've got these plots on our property in Naples, and these kill plots that, like, what's the value right now? Like, John, you hit it the other day, and it's sticking with me like a freaking knife in my side, that if the deer can see too far, they're not going to go unless they see something they want to go towards. So I think about our property in Naples. I think about the farm here with the big donger food plot. There's too much open space. These deer, they just too much open. So in these areas up at camp where we have these food plots, where we've struggled mightily to get stuff to grow and be productive, we are better off to let those areas grow back up, be a little thicker, be edge habitat, or just giving them travel corridors to move through. Whereas right now they're just open fields that we're struggling to get clover and brassica to grow in. It's like, what's the benefit there? We're spending money, and when it comes time to hunt deer, it's freaking wide open and we're not getting any return out of it. So I just challenge everybody, when they're thinking about, we got to put in these little quarter acre food plots. It's like, you're in ag country. It's like they have hundreds of acres of corn and beans around to eat on. You might get that couple opportunities over some little kill plot, but how much time are you going to spend on that when you could be focusing on better understory and better cover and better bedding to keep the deer closer to your property rather than all that? So those are a lot of words coming out of my mouth right now, but it's very interesting to me looking at all these comments. And I think we're going the complete opposite direction. A lot of the people that are looking at this, and we've been where everyone else is, and we're not seeing the production. So we're going back the other way. And a lot of that's from the guidance of you two, talking through a lot of this stuff. You're telling us, saying, yeah, you got to thicken things up. You got to add cover. So
I hate these podcasts that I listen to that are giving real specific answers. And I'm going to give you a range, but I would say from a bedding area adjacent to a food source, anywhere between 30 to 100 yards for does, or deer for that matter.
Okay.
30 to 100 yards. Most of mine are 30 to 75 yards.
Okay.
So, use that as a ruler stick. I would say every circumstance that topography plays into that, blah, 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 but that's a threshold. So some real information.
Okay. And Nick, if you do put that food plot in, I'll come over and hunt with you. So no problem. John Palomar, he had any tips for cutting trails? At what point in the year should you be staying off of them, both machine or foot? So let's say you got logging roads or trails cut through your goldenrod field. What's the I mean, I think you can cut that with just by anything. You can cut it with a lawnmower. I know, John, you do a lot of work around your property with just your ride-on John Deere lawnmower. But is there a point where you guys just stop with that, or do you kind of go all the way right up till the grass stops growing, cutting trails and maintaining things?
I mean, I take my deer out on a lawnmower a lot of times because they're so used to it. So it's that consistent pressure. I'll cut access trails in September, depending on the location. Um, a lot of it's foot traffic, and a big strategy that I have is how to maintain kind of that boot scent. There's a process that I put in place for that. But I would say I like content that you're walking on that's not stemmy and quiet. And if you have more like perennial grasses that are growing in those areas, a lot of times they perspirate or transpirate a lot. That will actually cover up your scent. I hate bare ground. People like, oh, well, I should kill all the vegetation. Well, why do you think bucks scrape the ground? Because the scent that they put in that particular location volatilizes at a lower rate as a result of the lack of vegetation. So innately, they've benefited themselves and communicated with their deer. So think about that as kind of an example where that applies to these areas where like guys want to come in and they want to spray, these trails in and have these muddy trails. I think that's an absolute horrible idea. And your trail width is critical, right? Because your physical contact to the resident, let's say it's goldenrod, for example, that contact is likely to be smelled by a deer. So it's the spacing for deer is different from human access. So I don't want to give any specifics, but I'm going to. Deer 2 to 6 feet, humans 6 to 10 feet. You can do 6 to 20 feet for humans. I mean, that's a range that I typically prescribe. And that could be a woodlot settings, that could be a field settings. I like the debris to fall in the deer's face as they travel through their trails. Creates a sense of safety. They do not smell anything that is foreign because you're not walking through those areas. So they're inundated with their own, and especially when the goldenrod gets really high and it falls in. I mean, that's a great tip. And that creates a false sense of security. And by the way, lead that into your kill plot that the guy was talking about earlier. That's going to be, knockout awesome. Where you're going to get it done. So hope that helps.
Yeah. So anything that you're running, for the most part, anything that you're setting up as being a deer trail or travel corridor transition area, means everybody uses different, words or descriptions or whatever. I'm not typically using those, for human use, especially during the hunting season. Off season stuff like that, you got to get around your property to do work. I understand that 100%. But there's a lot of trails, and I actually did again, not meaning to plug my YouTube channel, but I did a video on this where back when we bought our property, when we knocked the trails in, we planted every square foot of logging road trail or whatever you want to call it that we put in. Killed our hunting. Absolutely killed it to plant all that, the food plot. And I talk about that in the video. That the first 4 or 5 years we had our property, we were shooting ourselves right in the foot with it. We had too much food in all the wrong places, literally.
What were you planting, Ben? Just wondering.
It was clover and grain mix. And it was poorly accessed, everything like that. I mean, a lot of the, common stuff I see with properties nowadays, with that. So, with the machinery and stuff like that, and we weren't able to get a lot of growth. That's why grains and clovers were pretty decent with it, with the sunlight we were getting on those trails. But we don't plant any of those at all anymore. Any of the first plots we were really planting in the first 4 or 5 years we had the farm, we don't plant them anymore, just because they didn't work. And it doesn't work to have human impact on those locations that you're trying to attract deer to. You're repelling. You're not making it a magnet. You're making a repellent. So,
I got a couple tips on this. Get going on your trails early. Last year we were slow to get out there, and the goldenrod really got up on us, and it was quite comical because Brian jumped on the big John Deere, the big 4000 with the big old brush hog on the back, and thought he knew where the trail was, where he wanted to go. And he was pounding the piss out of some rocks, breaking teeth off the bush hog. So moving forward, we're going to definitely, establish the trails much earlier, right off the bat, as soon as things start growing, to start establishing the trails so that they're easier to identify and maintain. I think the point you guys made about, getting them down short enough, depending on the grass, you get some of that thick stem that can be real loud and crunchy to walk on, maintain that. And then lastly, last year, I I just had the roller. We had done a bunch of rolling of our buckwheat, and we have an area that's probably 100 yards wide by 400 yards long, and it's between a swamp and a cornfield. And we like to put trails in there, and we didn't get back there with the tractor, and it was too wet at the time. So I took my four-wheeler with the roller, and I just started driving the trails that we normally have in there and rolling it over. And I was amazed how well that worked at killing off the whatever that was, canary grass, goldenrod, some cattails. It killed that stuff off pretty well. And all the way up through deer season, you could walk those trails. They were green, and you could tell the deer were walking them. So that you don't have to have a mower to do that. If you have a regular lawnmower or a lawn roller that can go either behind your tractor or your four-wheeler, you can do quite a bit of work just with that. So
Yeah, the best tool I own, I have a walk behind brush cutter. It's I would recommend a hydrostatic one. Mine is not. Those are the best tool. If you can't afford a tractor, you can rent those. I used to rent those in college. I did an article for North American Deer Hunter just on a walk behind brush cutter, because I think that is the number one habitat tool that somebody could use to maintain vegetation, put in food plots, put in access trails. You could rent them for $100 for a weekend. Best tool you could buy. And I think that'll be very, very helpful. And you could start your trail work once the snow goes down. Start cutting those trees, start getting defined trails. Defined trails is the key to success. It is the key to generating the right movement. And you'll learn over time, see what the deer naturally want to do. And then if you hunt enough properties and see enough things, you can manipulate it and focus on, changing those in short ways so that you can make it more huntable too. So, there's a lot you can do, especially after timber harvest, because a lot of times the woods are a mess. That's why I hate when people hire loggers and eventually they're like, well, my hunting sucks. Well, usually it's an access issue. 99% of the time that's what the issue is. And they've got to fix that, but they've never constructed their property to know how deer naturally want to move. So after that, it changes everything. So before you get a logger come in and mark all your trails, you can do that right now. Go mark every single trail on your property, tape them off so you know where the deer before those loggers come, or before you start doing, any improvements on your property. Know what the deer naturally want to do and amplify that.
Well, great tip, and something I did last winter when I was had a lot of time on my hands when I was laid off of work. I just started walking, and I was shed hunting. We didn't have a good winter last year, and I was just walking deer trails, and I would turn on my tracking function on my hunting GPS app, using OnX at the time, and I just started just walking deer trails. And my God, did that paint a picture of what exactly is going on and how the deer are traveling. And you can really start to figure out what exactly is going on your property just by simply putting it on a map and going home and looking at it on a computer screen. And it's like, well, that makes good sense. And there's a rub line here with a deer trail. That's probably buck travel crossing over doe trails. So you can really start to paint some good pictures there too. So good stuff there, fellas. We just have a few more questions, and then we got more tonight, but we're just not gonna, the three of us cannot have an hour-long conversation. It's physically impossible. And I don't want John to have divorce papers in the morning. So quickly, lime. I don't want to get into the principles of lime because I'm sure it's just like everything else. There's a million things to it. Do you guys prefer pelletized or powder lime if you're going to apply?
Depends on your application and equipment. There's pluses and drawbacks to each. It's one of those things where, gosh, it's tough because some guys have to put it on by the ton, and then other places you almost have too high of a pH. You get somewheres, like up along the kind of the getting up like limestone region and stuff like that, up along kind of Jefferson County, that kind of area, you can get pHs that are way, way, above neutral. So it's tough. I would say soil test is a great place to start. The lime is going to be the availability of those micro and macro nutrients that the soil can, pull, the plant can pull from the soil for those plants. So it's definitely going to be cheaper to get ag lime than it would be to go out and buy bags, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for that one at the moment. That's a big rabbit hole to dive into.
I'll just give you, I'll give you kind of like the work aspect of it is on my own property. For example, I don't use pelletized lime right now. What I typically do is the way I stage the food plot setup is, and I do have limestone in my soil. By the way, when you buy in a piece of property, you should look at the soil composition. And, I have tools where I can kind of tell what your pH is before I even go there. So when you give me a soil test, I kind of already have it laid out, but I knew my soil was really good. I knew I wouldn't have to apply a lot of lime on my top field. I did. And I just put it in the back of a trailer and I just shoveled it out. Right. And that's when I established my food plot, 3 years ago. I haven't, rototilled it yet, but I dissed it in, the ag lime. And there's ag limes use a calcium base, domatic. We need calcium here. We're low calcium here. But it's coarser or larger, and it has to be dissed in the ground. I've been doing experiments where I just leave it and see what happens, and it does not incorporate itself naturally.
No.
So liquid lime does that. Pelletized lime does that better. If you don't want to till your ground, your options are liquid and pelletized. And pelletized is really finer grain. It's polymer bound, smaller grains, and it disperses. And like Ben said, it increases nutrient availability, microbial activity. Those soil organisms break down, decompose, create more organic matter. So that's critical. Nutrient availability is the number one thing. That's the difference between our soils and soils on the Midwest. Those pHs are a lot higher. Their nutrient availability is a lot higher. Their abundance, the richness, all those things, they got better growing seasons. And their nutrient uptake, at least for the deer, is going to be higher. Phosphorus levels in a lot of their soils are way higher than here. And that difference is plant life increases and blooms at more abundance. Those younger and more nutritious, forbs or plants that the deer are eating on, broadleaf plants a lot of times, or crop plants, they have higher nutritional content. Oh my gosh, bigger racks. You wonder why deer eat sunflowers in this when you plant them right off in the. They're phosphorus deprived. Sunflowers. That's why if you're trying to get deer interest in an area, plant sunflowers. Sunflowers, they get hammered early season. That's why soybeans get hammered. Their interest levels are based upon the nutrient levels, and one of the basic factors is lime. And I'm not a fan of liquid lime. It has its purpose and application, but its longevity is shorter. And if you're doing a no-till system, like let's say my pH levels were around 6.8, 6.9. I just checked last year. You got to check it at the same time every year, by the way. My pH levels at the same time, and some of it's plant dependent, but went up. My actually pH went up. And that's a factor of the hydraulic levels and the plants sucking in the nitrates, so they're not exposed and creating more, hydrogen aspect or hydrogen, positive hydrogen in the actual soil pads. That's dissolved and not a part. There's no aluminum. There's none of that stuff that kind of bounds out all these other nutrients. So the bottom line is you got some options, and any of them are good. Just do something and take soil samples. That's the layman's approach to it. You're wasting your time, and get the micronutrient study too. And by the way, CECs, OGs, all that stuff that goes into those, that's why you have consultants like us will help you. There's if you're just focused on chemistry, that's why you have people like us to help you, right? I'm not a soil science guy, but I know enough about soil to be dangerous. And I'm sure Ben's exactly the same as me. So I can at least tell a good story.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all. It's not like you got to use pellets, you got to use ag. There's, like John said, there's so many pluses and minuses to each one to fit your situation. Or, I say a lot, tools for your toolbox. It's, if it fits for you, and you need it, use it. is the baseline of that. I mean, that's the period on it. You gotta use what fits your situation. Like you said, with ag lime, you got to incorporate it a lot more. Pelletized is designed to break down, and liquid is very short run. So I mean, those are your kind of cliff notes, I guess, from John's big spiel.
Yep.
So, but yeah, no, that was all solid information. I mean, that was, if you're looking at any stuff online, that last 3-4 minutes of John right there, that was perfect, literally.
And if you have high pH, like Ben said, like in the upper areas, you're gonna end up incorporating a sulfate or an acid, and it sounds toxic, and it is, and it's intended to lower the pH. When you have pH credits like that, lime credits like that, that's what they're dealing with in the Midwest. Most of the areas we don't have that. We had acid rain here.
Yeah. That was Ryan Van Loo. So Ryan, thank you for the question. He had a smart ass question: is how early is too early to start running your turkey calls? You know the answer to that question, Ryan. Never. Ed Burns had a question that was in regards to liquid lime. We just covered that. Kind of talked a little bit about fertilizer. Is there anything else to hit on that, or do you think we covered that pretty well?
I don't use fertilizer, and you lower your rates of fertilizer, please. You're better off putting lime in the soil than fertilizer, unless it's a late season planting. Fertilizer tends to help the plants a little bit more.
And I would plug people to go back to the podcast, the first one that John and I did, and I think we did another one right around the middle of the summer last year. John talked extensively about his thoughts on, kind of no-till and using what you're growing as to regenerate the nutrients in your soil, so you don't have to be using fertilizer like that. It's a huge expense. And if you can start approaching things a little bit differently, you can save yourself a lot of money and a lot of work. And, I think that's a very important point there. So, I would definitely go back and check out those episodes from last spring and summer.
I would say with fert, I mean, I use one, it's kind of my one staple, I guess. And it's just for a variety for your screens. Definitely if you're trying to put a little bit extra growth on your turnips or brassicas, that kind of greens going into season right before a rain, because it volatilizes so much, is like 4600 to just flush, green growth, to some of those plants that are high demanding in nitrogen. And broadcasting that in as a granular with rain coming. That's kind of the only one I really utilize, other than maybe like a base block one, depending on what your soil test says. But that's kind of one that I've used for certain situations for fertilizer. But other than that, like John said, I mean, get your lime right, because a lot of times the nutrients are there in your soil. It's just your soil isn't at the right pH to absorb them naturally from the soil. So.
All right, we got 2 questions left that we're gonna hit here tonight. Ruth Ireland. I'm sure, Ben, you probably know who Ruth is. I'm not sure if John, you know who she is, but she's all over the place. She's a heck of a hunter, and she's right here, I believe, in the southern tier, Western New York, down towards the Allegheny County area. And
real good archer too.
Yeah.
There you go. Allegheny.
So I believe that's where she is. If she's not there, then she's somewhere else. But she's somewhere in this area. She's looking, we kind of talked a little bit about some of these, so we may have already hit some of her questions. But recommendations, if you've got a smaller piece of property, 38, let's just say 30 acres, to try to hold deer there and make it more attractive over throughout the year, not just for short periods of time, but, a long stretch. Any ideas? I mean, we've talked a ton about, how to manage food plot sizes, different structure of things, cover, all that sort of stuff. Is there anything we didn't hit there that we might be able to hit for Ruth that's an idea on a smaller piece of property, maybe taking into consideration her location down in the southern tier?
The only thing I'll say is, assuming there's some woodlot component to that, is, focusing on that young forest. And we've hit on that, a lot of those pioneer species can be reset back really easily. We cannot burn in these areas. So any of those upland sites, and again, usually burnings on, pine oak forest, but in a lot of these settings, the setback, it's mechanical. You're using, chainsaws, brush hogs, those type of things, weed whaps, all that stuff. I would say is try to maintain a good percentage of that in young forest. Maintain some some canopy, high canopy or mid-story or whatever you want to classify it as. For loafing areas or shade areas for deer. But think of it seasonally. Think about in the spring, a lot of the Mayflower or Trillium, those things starting to grow. Then you get the next bloom of plants, and think about the height and structure of those plants. Like we said, we're working from floor to 6-7 foot up. I think it's having plants kind of own those ranges in different arrangements, incorporating plantings. We gave some examples tonight. Red Osier Dogwood was an example I said at the end, but I'm a huge shrub guy. I think shrubs are king. And again, I think if you can incorporate shrubs in your planting, I think that's way more valuable than apple trees or some other mass producer. But again, I mean, right now, I just did a little video on spruce, because the deer are eating spruce, and which is again, that scares me. But the thing is think about the height of that in relationship to the snow load that we're dealing with right now. I was just up in the Adirondacks, where I was, it was waist high. And so, those deer are eating on something that is, not at the ground level. So your food plots become not very valuable at that point in time. So think about that. And then, that's a lot of reason people plant corn. Corn puts those ears and structure for them at a certain level. And, there's no reason you can't plant corn as an option, particularly late season, in a lot of areas. So there's a couple options for you, but yeah.
And so to touch on it for the 30 acres, everybody says, working 365, and that's really what we go for. But if you're really wanting that property, then it's kind of hard to say it, but if you want it to work, you shade your improvements toward fall attractiveness, early winter attractiveness. Our property is a pretty good example of that, is because there's a lot of cover and not a lot of ag on our property specifically. Our summertime usage is very low for deer. Our property, really, I don't even start to get any like velvet picks, everything like that. I might get an occasional cruiser through there going between, bean blocks or whatever you want to call it. But other than that, I don't see a lot of summer activity, and, my improvements are kind of slanted, toward fall, winter. And that's where I kind of, make my improvements, especially on a small parcel. It's really critical to make those improvements count if you're trying to improve it for hunting or improve it for the well-being of deer. Like John said, browse is king. If you're trying to really support those deer through the fall, through the winter months, when they're at the highest stress point here in the Northeast, that's your key. That's your kingpin for the 30 acres or less. And then just make it huntable. Don't think you need to improve every inch of it just because you can. There's great value in having dead zones on a piece of property, and on a 30-acre piece, it might even be like a small corner. But if that is the base of your whole access, I want that deer free. I don't want to touch anything down in that, let's say, bottom corner. You might be coming in from the house or whatever it might be on it. Yes, that's the big things with the 30 acres or smaller parcels, is you don't have to make every square inch great. And on all properties, you don't have to make every square inch great, just because if you put all the improvements everywhere, there's no flow. All you get is a big spider web, and it's very difficult to hunt that effectively.
And to Ben's point, don't be discouraged if you're not having deer on your property in the summertime. You listen to a lot of these YouTube guys, and block timber in agriculture areas is much different from where I'm hunting, where there isn't the agriculture volume. So it's more my recommendation, at least in highly woodland areas that do not have a lot of agriculture. All season food is critical, and that really depends a lot on a bunch of different social factors and deer interest points and looking at your neighborhood. But don't be discouraged if you're not getting deer all season. And if you only have time to plant, food plots once in a while, or focus on areas once in a while. I mean, I don't think you inundate yourself with this all season focus. I think Ben and I are probably guys that are doing that. And I'm assuming a lot of people, Billy, a lot of people are doing that, but I don't think that's for everybody. So, weigh your time. And I think, I'm trying to create all season food attraction in my areas. I'm trying to build interest. And I think that's a good thing. And these dough factory discussions that are out there, I did a post on that recently. I mean, that a lot of is a function of your neighborhood deficiencies in managing the deer herd. And there is shifting. Block timber, there's a lot of shifting. And the populations are a lot different in certain areas. So that all plays into your strategy. Adirondack area, you are going to be food focused. That's going to be your approach. And it's hard to do that when you only own 40, 50, 60 acres. But then you have a balance of food, and food is seasonal. So think about that as an option.
Okay.
When he says food, we're not talking food plot. We're just talking effective, efficient food. Just to be clear on that. I know everybody wants.
Yeah, deer eat like tips, right? The woody tips, that they do. They also eat stems. There's certain species they actually eat the stem. Red or dogwood is a good example. Shrub oak is a good example.
Sumac, another really good one for that.
Yeah,
right.
Eat the bark.
Right? Size freaking branches.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a forum the other day, and these guys kept, Facebook. I was on. This is why I hate Facebook. I'm sorry, we're on Facebook.
We're on Facebook. Easy, Joe.
But, well,
here comes Zuckerberg.
We had a snow load, and the first thing you see the deer go to is a sumac. They're eating the bark off the sumac, and somebody's like, "That's a porcupine." Okay, it's probable it's a porcupine. They're carnivores at that time, a little bit more so, but whatever. But it's more than likely a deer, and they eat bark. Sumac's a good example of that. You see that a lot.
Yeah. Great points. And it's been a lot of fun doing all this cutting that we're doing right now at the farm, and then going over there on the weekends, following and seeing how all of these tops that are laying there, all of the ends are gone. I mean, the deer are just pounding them. So we're having a really tough winter out here, just like everybody is in the New York area. So, I mean, these deer, it's been a month and a half, and it's been cold. It's been real cold. So it's tough to see these deer struggle. And when you're really paying attention to your herd and your property, it's like anything you can be doing right now to add a little extra food for them is super important. So, okay. Last question. I said it is, from my dad. And this is something that we've talked about a lot at our property. We call it red brush, but I believe it's that red osier dogwood that you guys talk about. How do you get more of that? Because we love it. And I don't know if we should love it. Is it a good thing to have? Is it a bad thing to have? And if it is good, how do you get more of it?
It needs full sun. So that's one thing that people miss out on because they see it in swampy areas. Yep. It needs full sun, and it'll get choked out if it doesn't have full sun. Rooted or cutting options. I like rooted, but I've done cuttings. You can cut the plant and make sure, you cut it right side and you mark it so you know what side goes in and what side goes up. But yeah, and the deer will pound it. It takes about 3 to 4 years to establish a plant. I'd fence it typically in some areas. I like it actually in bedding areas. If you can create a little vernal pool that's wet in a bedding area, if you have spots like that, put a ton of it in and fence it all off. Give it about 3 years, and voila, food and bedding. And they'll eat it in the wintertime. They eat it right now. I've seen, they're eating obviously, woody tips, but shrub tips, but they're eating the buds off a lot of things, but they eat the stems. They eat them right down on the ground. So red osier dogwood is, and you can find it on the sides of the road. Just take cuttings. There's a beaver swamp by me. I just go cut it and give it to my, grandmother. She potted it because it's beautiful. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. It's, you can find it free all over the place.
You say full sun. Definition.
6 hours.
6 hours. Okay.
6 hours.
Yeah.
It'll do okay in shade, but it does real good if you have wet areas like small vernal pools. It does really, really well. Really, really well in those areas.
You use a lot of big words that I don't understand. Vernal.
I
know there's a Vernon. Vernon, that's an exit on the throughway. I know that. That's
Wet puddle.
wet
boy.
puddle. Okay, thank you.
Wet puddle.
A seasonal wet puddle. Yep.
Oh, okay.
So
Yep.
anyways, so red brush thing. This time of the year, I like trimming. I don't know what you want to call it. You want to call it red brush, red osier dogwood, whatever. I'm assuming that's probably what it is, because if you're seeing browse value and deer usage, it's solid. I mean, I have a couple dogwood pockets that I love to shed hunt in, just because I usually find a couple in those pockets this time of the year. I totally utilize them. This is a good time of the year to get in and cut. Mike was saying cut a third to a quarter of your apple tree. I might go in there and cut a third or a quarter off of that bush to stimulate new growth going into the next year. Because at some point you're not going to get as much return on a stem at some point. It's going to be up and out of deer level, especially if you have a decent stand of it. So getting good new growth in that is key and can help. Also, like John was saying, you could take those cuttings off of what you just cut, take them home, pot them, plant them, whatever. Red osier is not as good of a self-rooting one as like some of the other dogwoods, like gray dogwood. Silky is actually really good to take comparatively to red. It's probably the hardest one to get to take, but you're still, I don't know, 50-50, I would just about say, John. I mean, I don't know your experiences with it, but maybe 50-50 on taking with red osier. So
I try to do if I got an area, I'll just cut a bunch of it, and I'll try to overwhelm the deer. I'm usually trying to overwhelm the deer with options, but so some of them will make it. So if you want 50 plants, plant 100. And so like that kind of gets you in that threshold. Some will root, some will not. A lot of it's depending on your soil quality. And then, the age of that. I mean, younger is better. So older doesn't work as well. That's pretty much with any cuttings, younger is better. It's a little more vigor. So, that means cut higher in the plant. It's usually, it's aged a little bit younger and you're good to go.
Beautiful. I think that's it. Jim, our moderator, how do we do? We're over our time, but
not bad. I mean, there's a few in there about the North Country and stuff like that, but I think for the most part, what you guys covers most of the questions. I think when you get up into the big woods, some people were wondering about food plots, and I think we kind of hit on that last time. So if people want to check, I think it was towards the end of our last one, we kind of hit on that a couple of times. But also I think when you get up in the big woods, I think some of the best things you can do is TSI stuff, because there's so much old timber up there. I've seen it on my father-in-law's property. I was commenting to a guy here, probably over the last 5+ years, he's been working several areas with a logger, and the difference over the past 5 to 6 years of the amount of deer that he holds throughout the entire year is, unbelievable, just browse wise and stuff. Because he's kind of up towards the top of the hill, and up there with how much snow they get, the deer really migrate down in the winter. And he's actually, like, my cell cams is blowing up this year in one of the areas that he did 2 years ago. And it's just nonstop. They're living right in the hole there. So normally the deer wouldn't be there. And over the past few years, the work that's been done and the new growth and feed that's been provided through that, I think is a good way to go in the North Country.
Yeah. And I would also point out that that the New York State does have I believe it's like the Young Forest Initiative that they're doing. And I'm not going to name any of the areas because I've hunted one of them and I would really like to hunt it again. I didn't kill anything, but it's incredible what they're doing in an area that typically doesn't have forest management going on. So go online, do some research. You'll find that there's some state land pieces that are like getting thinned out. And I think in the next, 5 years, there's going to be some dynamite hunting up there in some areas where there hasn't been good understory and good food for deer to live in. So,
I mean, don't forget too, you can get somebody from the DEC to come out and just walk your property with you and kind of put together some sort of a plan, or anybody like you guys, that are doing the consulting and stuff like that. Try to put together some sort of a plan to make it a year-to-year thing and not just a one cut and then we're going to see what happens. We've done it on our property here around the Finger Lakes, and we've done it up north at my in-laws' property. And in both places, that's the biggest difference I've seen is new growth stuff and kind of changing it and manipulating it to the way you want it. So.
Yep. All right. I say we start wrapping her up. I will quickly plug the Shed Fest that we have going on right now. It's off to a hot start. We've got see Ben's already on the board.
Oh,
I was
sweet.
doing habitat work, by the way,
You
when
were.
I found.
At least that's what Instagram
Trying to get
said.
wait. Is that a match set? I'm the key judge there. What do we got?
No, not a match set, actually. Unfortunately, no,
We-
if I find the other side to the one, it'll be bleach white because he lost it in September, and the other one will be a big spike. So they don't even look alike. So
That's cool. You get cool factor points.
It'll
Don't forget about that.
it'll score well in the character
Mhm.
category. But so we are running a shed hunting contest. It is running now through the end of April. So have had a few people say to me, well, what the hell's the point of doing it right now? Because there's 2 feet of snow on the ground. Right now, anybody can apply. We're going to run application up until April 1st. To apply, what you do is you go to our website, pertneeroutdoors.com, go to our shop, and you purchase a t-shirt. When you buy a t-shirt, it automatically enters you into the contest, as well as you get a shirt, obviously, and you get a 1-year membership to the National Deer Association. So a lot of good value, I feel, there, and definitely encourages everybody to get out and have a good time. This is not a score contest. At the end of the day, this is just a big membership drive for the National Deer Association. I feel like it's an association that all of us as deer hunters should belong to. We need a big voice right now, especially with everything that's going on. There's a lot of special interest groups that are wanting to poke away and take away some of our favorite pastimes and some of the things that we care a lot about. So we need to have organizations like National Deer Alliance with a large contingent of members to speak for us when they're in front of groups in those situations. So that's my sales pitch there for the contest. If you have any questions, let us know. Running up through April 1st to enter and support a good cause. So you guys got anything in closing? I appreciate both of you guys for donating 4 hours of your time over the last 7 days to the podcast. I appreciate that.
No, thanks for having us on again. And I'll plug myself real quick. Again, John Teater, Whitetail Landscapes. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. You can get a hold of me. I have a website as well, and love to help people design their properties throughout the state. That's my focus point. I do this professionally, and I try to put together a really complete package. You can see Ben and I both have a lot of knowledge. And the objective out of this is to help increase and save everyone time. As a landowner, we want to optimize our properties, and some of us not being large landowners, it's tough to feel like you're doing the best thing you can. It is worth it, absolutely worth it, to hire guys to provide those recommendations. I've hunted really highly dense areas of deer and very low density areas, and I've hunted industrial parks, suburban areas, block timber, mountainous country. I've really had the smorgasbord of different opportunities, and I think that's really shaped my knowledge. A lot of things I'm doing are offensive. There's a science basis to most of the stuff that I'm doing, but the reality of it is there's a feel and touch aspect of this that we bring to the table that will save you a lot of time and effort. I never thought about hiring a consultant. I did 15 years ago. And it set me in the mindset as I can do a lot more and help people. And I've just been riding down that train for a while now. And I feel like, what I'll save you in time and effort is well worth. And you get a lot of discounts through box blinds, things that are part of my packages. So usually it doesn't cost you anything by the time you're done hiring me. You usually make it out in the deal, but that's a separate aspect of it. So I'm just plugging me, and I hope that everybody got some benefit out of this, because we were specific, and a lot of podcasts I listen to aren't anywhere near specific as this, and certain examples of how they approach things. So I think that's a noteworthy comment for Ben and I, because we're willing to share, and we're New Yorkers, so we got to stick together. So that's it for me.
Yeah. Oh, I just woke the kids up. Got me fired up, John.
There you go, baby.
But no, and that like John said right there at the end, that was a great tie into, I guess, my side of stuff. There's no secrets. I mean, it's like he said, and last time, it's not rocket science, guys. But having that set of eyes that's known how stuff's going to work in certain situations is really invaluable for a piece of property, for a consultant to be out there with you, whether it's on the forestry side of it or the habitat wildlife side of it, deer hunting side of it, whatever your goals are. It might be more, timber and long-term income for your property, and the hunting's kind of a side note, or hunting's the main focus. And finding the person that balances that the best, and working with it. But other than that, John's a great wealth of knowledge. I love having other people's build too. And Jim doing a great job moderating and also, filling in the conversation. I mean, it's really cool to get everybody's different minds going in different situations and being able to just put little pieces of that together for people. So you don't just get a one person's perspective on it. You get everybody's kind of thoughts on it or what might have worked for them. And I tell people all the time, I'm not done, learning. I'm planning on going to the NDA seminar they're doing down there in Pennsylvania at the Bearded Buck. I would highly encourage anybody to do that or do the NDA deer stewardship programs. Level 1's online, level 2's in persons. But yeah, I mean, all that stuff, you can never stop learning. And there's just a wealth of information out there and some great consultants and people to reach out to. And if somebody's telling you that, you got to buy my program to get the latest secret or do this or do that, I'm calling BS on it, dude. I mean, there's no secrets in it. I mean, you're not going to get, I'm not going to give you 5 tips and say, well, if you pay me, I'm going to give you the 7th tip. That's not what it's about. So
I'll give you the tip. All right.
Of the donger. But anyway,
you need a donger food plot is what
of
you
the
need.
donger food plot. Gotta be, but no. So
gotta hunt the tip. That's where you gotta hunt.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But John's stuff, I love. I follow along with John's stuff. I plug John's stuff too. Any consultant stuff, I really plug a lot of their stuff. If it's good, valuable information, and I can put it to the people that are looking at my stuff, there's no harm in that. It's not a competition. I'm not, out here to compete with people. That's not what it's about. It's about helping people, and your work's going to speak for itself. So, John does a great job. There's a lot of other consultants that do a great job. So I would say whoever you decide to work with, if you do, or just look at their content, doesn't hurt to watch. I mean, and I'm not going to try to sell you on it. So I would check out John's page on Instagram. He's super active on Instagram, not anywhere close to what I am. I do more YouTube kind of stuff is my thing, single take stuff. And that's where I'm at most of the time is on Old Tin Cup, habitat restoration enhancement on YouTube. I do once in a while on Facebook. Instagram's kind of a catch-all for the in-between. But thanks for having me, guys. I really love these conversations.
Yep, I can tell because just keep fucking talking. So, all right,
this
boys.
was supposed to be an hour.
I know. Listen,
an hour ago.
People know me by now. I can't have a short. I'm a talker. It's nothing I can do. I have a podcast. Go figure. And
yeah, go figure.
And I have to lead. I have to start every podcast with a 10-minute introduction about what I think about everything. Who the hell gives a shit? But anyway, thank you for Jimbo.
Let's just when you post this up, Bill, if you want to put links to these guys' stuff in our post, because that was somebody's question in the comments was links to these guys' stuff. So if we could post that up when we post this, that'd be great. And greatly appreciate it, guys. This is good stuff.
Yep. And to everybody who's been sticking with us and listening to this stuff and interacting, it's much appreciated. So that's what we do it for, is for all of you out there that keep us going. So, all right. Good night, boys. Feed them.
You feed them.
guys.
Feed them.
Bye.
Wash your hands.